Today is CitizenCon, that yearly event for Star Citizen, which takes a look at everything to do with the game. Now right here we can see one of the brand new upcoming planets that should be arriving at some point in the future. More on that in just a moment. This is a planet Pyro 3 in the brand new star system of Pyro. Now as you can see, the scene features a whole bunch of new technology. Firstly, a ship here and a demonstration of the upcoming cloud tech. Now CIG were quite clear here that the cloud tech on demonstration here is an early iteration, so it is subject to change, but even still it looks very nice indeed. You can also see as the guy gets closer down to the planetary surface that the clouds cast shadows across the terrain. Now each planet in Pyro is very unique. Pyro 3 perhaps most of all, with the beautiful yellow grass here, a lot of moss as well dotted all around the place, and it gives it a very unique look. So in case you're wondering what we're looking at here, this is a walkthrough of the new planet and a mission that CIG wanted to demonstrate. Now, they assured us that this is all very real, this is all being fully built, and they actually joked, no sandworms here. Sandworms, of course, a reference to the scripted content that was demonstrated a few years ago at a previous CitizenCon, and that didn't actually make it into the game, at least not yet. This full playthrough then was pretty lengthy, and if you want to check the full thing, do have a look at the links in the video description where you can go and watch all of that for yourself. Meanwhile, I've done a bit of a breakdown here, put a few cuts to show some of the highlights and some of the areas that I really do feel demonstrate what CIG are aiming for here. The outpost then looks very different to what we've seen so far in Star Citizen. It's more of a, quite a big settlement actually. These are modularly built up from various different assets and then assembled together to give each area a little bit of uniqueness. Similar for the interiors. In fact, there was a whole section on the CitizenCon, on the keynote, about interiors. It does seem that these have been built with great care to have a lot of detail, and eventually I suspect these will be available to players to actually purchase or use as housing. In the meantime though, this area is a mission. It's dominated and controlled by a particular faction. Now you can earn a reputation with this faction. In this case, the player is somewhat friendly with them as they're allowed to walk into the settlement and access various areas and various buildings, although you did notice that NPC turning the player around, not allowing them into that particular room. And as we'll see further into this video, the NPCs, the faction here, does behave differently depending on your reputation with them. Keep in mind, of course, that some of this may well be scripted, as it's still very early on in production. And talking of that, they say Pyro will be released in version 4.0 of Star Citizen, which will come at the same time as the new technology, the new server tech, server meshing. So no release date as such for that, likely quite a long way off still. For those of you that may not be aware, server meshing is the technology that will allow players to cross from one server to another, and therefore from star system to star system or planet to planet. A vital part of Star Citizen's future development then, that will allow a greater number of locations within the system or within the game, as well as a greater number of players, and allowing them to move between all those respective zones. The player's objective on this particular playthrough was to get access to this artifact. 5 million credits there, so pretty expensive. Fortunately, the player had the money, so the NPC brings the artifact over, and yeah, they inspect it and store it. So one of the main focuses for this entire playthrough was to show different ways of achieving the same goal. In this case, the player didn't want to pay the money on this particular occasion, so they betray the faction. Keep in mind that they were friendly with the faction, that's how they got to this point, actually walked in. But they decided to betray them at the last minute. Either they didn't have the money or simply didn't want to pay it, so they shoot the NPC, the store manager, and then steal the item. Of course, the base then turns hostile, everyone will come after you, and there's a few bits of gunfight in here, although I noticed CIG were pretty careful about just how much they demonstrated the competence of the AI. Basically running out as fast as they can and not getting into too many firefights. Anyone who's got into any gunfights with the NPCs in Star Citizen currently will know that the AI is really bad, to say the least. So that may have changed with version 4.0. By that point, it may not. I guess we'll have to wait and see. So the players managed to get into their ship. You can see the outpost. They're fleeing here with the artifact. However, the outpost is equipped with anti-aircraft turrets, and it puts them to very good use here. The player wasn't fast enough, and unfortunately didn't make their escape. There we go, dead. Now, there's also a third way to head into the outpost. Different time of day here, demonstrating the gorgeousness of the planets. Absolutely stunning. In fact, I'd say these are among some of the best planets ever released in a space game. Very easily so. Now, on this occasion, the player isn't friendly with a faction, so they're going to have to sneak in. So scouting out some potential entrances here, as well as checking out where the NPCs are located. Now, as the player is making their way into the base here, somewhat stealthily, but also by killing a bunch of people as well, let's talk about some of the other things that were discussed during this part of the keynote, or the earlier parts of the keynote. Here, I'll just provide a very brief overview of some of the various topics that were discussed, and I'll come back to them in the next videos where we go into a bit more detail. So one of the first points they discussed was the jump points. These are the areas that allow players to move between different star systems, so between Stanton and Pyro. Now, one thing they were very keen on is to make sure that the access to the jump points was different depending on the system. Stanton, of course, is very strictly controlled. It has a lot of security there, so the Stanton side of the jump point tends to be pretty much peaceful. However, on the Pyro side, Pyro being a pirate faction-controlled star system, things can turn very dicey very quickly. The jump points then exist within some beautiful cloud formations. The Stanton side, very tranquil, very peaceful. The Pyro side looking visually far more aggressive and dangerous. The jump points then were pretty much the part that CIG opened the keynote with, but after that they moved on to various other aspects of Pyro. Virtually the entire first hour of the keynote was dedicated to various parts of concept art for that star system, and some of the details here were quite involved. Other details, in fact a huge chunk of details, were very sparse indeed, and effectively just discussed the how the artist goes about creating concept art, for example. This covered ideas such as space stations, both the external visualization of these, which are meant to be rough and ready, as well as the internals of those stations, again very grim looking locations. They then went on to discuss these sort of outposts here, like the ones we're seeing here, and how they are constructed. This included some developer insight and a bit of an overview of the workflow that they actually go through for that. The developers then spent a lot of time talking about concept, talking about pre-production and design philosophy. So very clear to me that Pyro is still very early on in development, despite Pyro 3 and these parts of the gameplay looking very well fleshed out already. I think it's important to remember that one planet, one area of a single planet, doesn't necessarily represent an entire star system. So yeah, a lot of work I suspect for CIG to do before this finally sees the light of day, or that finally reaches the player's hands. So then, what's my thoughts on this particular playthrough, this demonstration here? Well, in principle, I think it's a very nice proof of concept. The areas are very well realised, stunningly beautiful actually, both the planet itself, the clouds, the internal environments as well. It's clear a lot of thought has gone into this. There's bound to be some speculation that areas here are scripted, and I can totally understand why some people would feel that way. After all, it's not too unusual for developers when doing keynotes to use scripted content. Just briefly here's a quick look at the new interface, the new inventory management. That's going to be coming as a part of patch 3.15. That's the next update that will be coming to Star Citizen. But the player here was changing out their clothes in an attempt to actually blend in more with the faction in at the outpost. So once they get out of this room, hopefully the idea was they'd be able to sneak out rather than shoot their way out. And that actually brings me on to another thought, and that is the nature of these types of missions. Obviously, if these missions do play out as CIG are showing here, nice little bug, well, they're going to be pretty involved. We can see that there's 3 different approaches at least to getting this artifact. The player in this case is going to break into the safe to try and steal the object. Initially they went in, purchased it. The second time they went in with the faction being friendly and then went hostile and stole it. So 3 options there. But the thing is, as good as these missions are, well, how many times can you actually do this? Will there be enough variations in these missions? How many of them will there actually be? Will a mission just be the same type again and again at different locations? Or will instead you have to break in and take different objects? A lot of unknown questions at the moment. Typically, with online games and MMOs, it can be very difficult to achieve enough variation in content to keep people interested for a prolonged period of time. And that can mean creating hundreds upon hundreds of missions. So, yep, that's a question very much in my mind. As impressive as this looks, how many variations, how easy and difficult will it be for CIG to create enough variations to keep players interested and engaged long term? So there we have it. Impressive presentation, but with the usual caveats that come with anything CitizenCon related. Do let me know your thoughts and feelings in the comments section below. What do you think of this mission playthrough? What do you think of the visuals of this planet Pyro 3? If you were to take a guess, when do you expect to see this? I'll be back very soon with another video to talk about some of the other stuff that was shown off on the keynote for Star Citizen. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.